Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend, Sam Clements. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well.
I am.
Now, Sam, here we are into the second week of the Olympics, the 2020 Olympics, interestingly enough, being held in 2021. And just a few more days left to go. And by all accounts, Sam's, it seems as though this is one of the least viewed, most unpopular, the Olympics with the least interest, maybe even ever. And it has a lot of people, particularly those people at the networks, kind of scratching their heads why. I mean, why exactly is viewership down some 48% from the Rio Olympics, which was down from the London Olympics? And when you take a look at rating shares, it really doesn't seem as though Americans care as much as they used to, even if the absolute number of people still remains relatively high in the mid-teens or what have you, low to mid-teens in terms of millions. But when you think about the size of the country, over 330 million people and thereabouts, it's not that many. So Sam, here we are. I'm Gen X. I might have my own reasons, but you're Gen Z. You might have your own reasons. But what I'm watching and what I'm seeing is people your age are tuning out more than they ever have. So what gives?
Well, I think it's kind of a perfect storm. I think you have an underlying trend that we've seen for several Olympics, like you mentioned with Rio and London and what have you. And that's kind of been the underlying trend that we've seen. And then you have things on top of that. It's in an off year, which, may or may not have a big impact. But anecdotally, it feels kind of weird that we're having the Olympics right now, and then we're going to turn around and have the Winter Olympics so soon after this. You add on top of that the fact that there's no fans in the stadiums. That, to me, is a huge part of it. I mean, you look at every other sport we've had where there's been no fans in attendance, whether it was the NBA playoffs last year in the bubble that had awful viewership metrics, and even baseball at times, certain stadiums had weaker numbers when there was no fans. And it makes sense when you look at it that way, that people, that's part of it. That's part of what people watch is for the cheering fans. They get involved and they feel the excitement in a stadium. And when there's no one there, really, it's kind of hard to get a little excited about what's going on at the Olympics.
So would you say for people your age, that's a huge chunk of it? There's no excitement in the sports themselves because there's really, as you said, no one in the stands, no one there to get excited about, no one waving miniature flags, all that stuff, all the hullabaloo and hoopla and noise that is so typical of an Olympic sporting event.
Well, and then you add on top of it that most Americans are asleep when a lot of these events are going on. And two, for young people, it's shockingly difficult to watch what you want to watch of the Olympics right now compared to previously. It's on Peacock. It's on this portion of Peacock, which is the NBC streaming app. And then it's become almost a running joke. Young people are supposed to be the ones that know how to stream everything, know how to find whatever they want to watch. And nobody can seem to watch what they were planning on watching. It seems to never be on. You're looking for the Olympic golf match, and all of a sudden you're watching the
team handball.
Yeah, team women's handball of Sweden versus South Korea. It's like, this is not what I was told I was going to be watching. And so, I mean, that happened to me. I was trying to watch some of the golf, and there was some other random sport on. I was like, this isn't working. So you add on top of that the fact that you're not watching it live anyway. So most people already know what happened due to social media.
Yeah.
And the fact that there's no fans on top of that. So even if you already know the score, why would I go back and watch something that I already know what happened with nobody there to cheer on and get the sort of excitement that you get with it? And, you mentioned the viewers that we've had, on Sunday, I think there was 19.4 million. It's downhill since then to 15.7 million in the US. There's 330 plus million Americans. And for something that, previously was the biggest sporting event in the world, that's pretty weak numbers, if you ask me.
Well, Sam, you bring up a good point in terms of the various outlets, and NBC here, they are trying to give people what they want. And in the end, all they're doing is confusing people, because I've heard that a number of different places. You got Peacock, you got it's on the TV, then you have separate sporting channels and whatnot. Where do I go watch it? What's going to be on? I'm not exactly sure. And oftentimes, Sam, when you try to please everyone, what do you end up doing?
Pleasing no one.
Absolutely pleasing no one. And I'd say really the networks are doing this by trying to give too many outlets and too much access. There's what do I say about my cable or my DirecTV all the time? I've got 300 channels of nothing to watch.
Yep.
So that's kind of what the networks have been giving us with the Olympics, the last couple of ones, in my estimation, giving us 300 channels of nothing to watch. Now maybe there's going to be someone out there that wants to see the new sport, the wall climbing, I think it is. But to me, that's about as boring as it gets. I mean, watching people do the wall climbing in front of no one.
Yeah. I mean, you even take baseball Japan chose to have baseball added back to the Olympics. The home country gets to add something, and naturally.
I mean, the Japanese baseball games are kind of like Premier League soccer games.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Lots of chanting and cheering and everyone going bananas.
But right now we're in the middle of the MLB season. We're right at the trade deadline. So there is not a single starting MLB player on the U.S. Olympic team. You're seeing half of these countries have retired MLB people who, maybe signed a minor league deal and they're on their last breath of their MLB life. But it's not exciting. I used to like watching baseball. Olympic baseball is a cool idea. You see, it's such an international sport for a lot of countries. And I'm seeing Scott Kashmir be the premier player for the U.S. baseball team. So
I don't even know who that is.
Exactly. There's not a lot of excitement. No offense to Scott Kashmir. He had a great career, but I think that time has passed.
Well, Sam, I mean, it sounds like from Gen Z's perspectives, maybe the viewership, or at least one person of Gen Z's, part of the problem with it is it's just not exciting. I mean, what you just mentioned is the no fans, weird sports at weird times. There's not a lot of excitement and therefore not a lot of interest.
And the dream teams are gone. There's no, the 90s dream team for the NBA, we've lost to teams that we should not have lost to so far in basketball. And so there's not that excitement. Even with all these great players we have, there's not that camaraderie in the team and the sort of feel you get around it and the dominance. And it's just not exciting. There's not, the gymnastics isn't as exciting as some people have said it is previously. And it's a trend.
Well, there's something about the dream team and then going on to where I think maybe Gen X and maybe even boomers and even people my parents' age, how they feel about it. I mean, so I think for your group, it's just not very exciting. And so, but in terms of the dream team from 1992, I would say that there were some real characters on that team.
Yeah.
You had Magic, I think Bird was on it, you had Barkley was on it, Jordan, all that stuff. Not only the best basketball players in the NBA, but maybe some of the best basketball players of all time, and some colorful personalities.
And they hated each other.
And some colorful personalities as well. I mean, Sir Charles, all that stuff. So they really kind of amped it up a whole bunch and had a lot of fun with it. I dare say you couldn't, unless you're just a rabid basketball player, you probably couldn't find the average person on the street that could name more than half the team that's over there right now.
Yep.
And here I am 30 years later, almost rattling off the entire team from 1992. So that's my comment on the dream team. Now, in terms of Gen X and maybe older, and this is completely unscientific, folks, is the thing that was always kind of fun about the Olympics in the past was it was special. Here it is. This is the only time you get to see some of these sporting events. The only time you really get to see the track and field, the only time you really get to see the Olympics, the only time you really get to see the swimming. And it came around once every 4 years. And they really, Sam, in my estimation, perhaps I'm looking back on the world with rose-colored glasses, really unified the country. And that's what the Olympics did, was kind of, for all of our differences, we all kind of rallied around the flag. No pun intended. I mean, people truly did that. And people, it unified us. For nothing else, for 2 weeks. And here we are. This go around, it doesn't seem as though the Olympics have really unified us, largely due to maybe some of the, if you want to call them controversies, some of the athletes have had going into it, particularly regarding the flag and all that stuff. So there hasn't been the unifying factor. And then also, Sam, there's the issue of all these sports aren't as unique as they used to be because we are inundated, in my estimation, with sports, with all the sports channels. If I really want to go watch track and field events on any given night, I can go do it. I don't have to wait 4 years.
Right.
If I want to watch swimming, I don't have to wait 4 years. There's a channel for this. There's a channel for that. There's an ESPN app where there's something. All I need to do is dial it up, and there you have it. And so there's a question of the demand has been out there, but we've just shifted, Sam, that supply curve way the hell out to the right with this stuff.
Yep.
So the demand hasn't changed maybe as much. We've just all of a sudden increased the supply so much that the price has gone down, and there you have it.
And you kind of hit on it, but I think an important point of it is you're not seeing a lot of the same, and not across the board, but you're not seeing a lot of the same pride and people representing their country, at least in our country, I think, that you had seen in previous Olympics. You see the former WWE wrestler who broke his neck and ended up winning gold in wrestling, Kurt Angle, I think it was, draped with the American flag around him, crying tears. I mean, he went through all that. And now you're saying people, BMX biker saying she wanted to burn the American flag if she won a medal. And a lot of people, I'm not saying that's everyone, you're seeing a lot of pride still for a lot of the athletes, but even just a few bad apples kind of sours the whole group for a lot of people who are going to watch it. And you've seen it time and time again. And I'm not going to get into disrespecting the flag or what have you. Not having pride in your country in the event that is supposed to be the most prideful event that you could have for your country kind of ruins the whole thing, whether it should or not. It kind of has that feeling around it.
Well, and you bring up a good point about one bad apple really does oftentimes spoil the whole bunch. You find one moldy strawberry in a container, you throw the whole container out. And I think that's happening. And it's not just what you said. I've read this as well from a number of different places that, some of the comments like the BMX racer or the hammer throw person and what have you really have turned off a lot of folks and tainted or painted the entire U.S. Olympic team with kind of a bad brush, if you will. Never mind that these Americans have First Amendment rights, and if that's the way they feel, then that's fine. But there are going to be, for every action, there's a reaction. And for their actions, they've spawned a lot of reactions where Americans are saying, well, that's the way that's the way the team is, and the U.S. Olympic Committee is not going to do anything about it, Jen. Then to heck with the whole lot. Because,
and you mentioned it, I mean, one bad apple really does spoil it in the sense that, I mean, this is, again, the most prideful event that people have in the country, or should have, by my estimations, at least athletically. And it's just hard to kind of wrap your brain around some people's actions, and you really don't hear about the super prideful people because that's almost kind of what's expected. And no one really writes many articles about someone. Sunny Lee, they wrote some articles about her obviously winning gold in gymnastics, but if people are prideful up on stage, that's kind of what you should expect, at least by my estimation. So you're not going to get as many news clicks or articles on that as you are someone saying, I'm going to burn the American flag if I get up on stage.
Yeah. And speaking of Sunny Lee, and where's she going to school next year?
The wonderful Auburn University.
So she's going there next year. But you're right. I did mention this. My son, who's down at Auburn, as you well know, he took some pride in knowing that a gold medalist is going to Auburn, and he thought that was pretty cool. And he now follows her on Instagram and everything like that. But even he admitted there's not as much ink or as much news bait or clickbait, or there's just not as much information about Sunny as there has been about Simone Biles and her struggles with
essentially the yips, but for gymnastics, I think they call it the twisties.
The twisties or what have you. And, more power to her. And she's got the struggles and what have you. But here we have someone who wins the Olympics, and the news is more on the person that is having some mental blocks at the Olympics, which is going to turn off other people as well. So when you're focusing on sort of the negative stories as opposed to the positive stories, and it's just going to alienate a certain type of viewer. Now, going to my parents, people of my parents' generation, there's an element of all of this that what you had to say, but then there is a question of, well, if they aren't doing it for America, then they're just out there competing for themselves, and they're so much younger than we are. We just don't identify anymore. And I'm finding myself really increasingly in that camp. The older I get, the younger the athletes are getting, and the less I kind of associate with them. And so I'm tuning out a little bit just in sports in general. If I don't have an emotional attachment to necessarily the athlete or the sporting event, it's difficult for me to have much interest. So I think we're seeing that as well as our population ages a little bit. So it's almost a perfect storm that you have a lot of things going on this year that were going to cause this to be the most or least viewed U.S. Olympics in quite some time.
Yeah. And I don't know if it would have been at the exact same time last year, but you have the NBA free agency period opening up right now. You have the MLB trade deadline going on right now. You have a lot of major sports going on right now. You had the NBA draft. I mean, there's a lot of, like you mentioned, there's a lot of outlets for people who want to be involved in sports that they don't really feel like they need to wait 4 years. I mean, the only time I've watched any of this Olympics was what I told you. I was trying to watch another event, and I ended up watching, I think it was Sweden versus South Korea women's handball, and I ended up watching it for about 20 minutes. But that is the extent of my Olympic watching for this cycle.
I do have to admit, I wondered where you came up with the Sweden versus South Korea handball competition earlier when you said that. So now I know you actually
Swedes
did watch
were pretty dangerous.
Yeah. In truth, Sam, I confess I have not watched anything, any of the Olympics, but for that which I have scanned, I've zipped past when I'm doing some channel search. And I just don't watch as much television in general, and I watch even fewer amount of sports. So what do you think the IOC, the U.S. Olympic Committee, the networks, whomever is in charge of engendering and promoting, fostering, what have you, interest in the Olympic Games, what can they do for the next Summer Olympics to try to bring back some of the excitement?
Well, I think they're fighting an uphill battle, like we talked about, quoting Rio and London, and just the overall trend of Olympic viewership. But I think you need more stars. You need people who are going to get behind some of these superstars. Simone Biles was one. I think that's probably hurt a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, she's probably the most well-known gymnast ever at this point now. Up there.
Close.
I mean, there's an argument she's won more medals than just about anyone. Probably the most talented ever by my estimation. And her people were behind her. People really supported her, and her, kind of stepping down, whether it's right or not, I don't have a problem with it, but that hurts. And the Dream Team's another example. People don't really, it's just a bunch of people shooting the basketball now, more so than it was a team back then. And I think that's what they really need to focus on. One, just the marketing of getting superstars, beforehand. The guy Dressel, I think his name was, the swimmer who won more medals than anyone, I believe. I had never heard of him. I've heard of Michael Phelps for
years,
15 plus years now.
Yeah.
Even Ryan Lochte, or whatever his last name was. They were household names. This guy was, and maybe he will be next time go around, but I think they need to do a better job of beforehand, before these events starts, really hyping up people and doing a better job of marketing, especially marketing the people that, consumers of television are willing to get behind, and less of the people they're not willing to get behind.
Well, you're right on that. And I do think that NBC, for better or for worse, and obviously in this instance for worse, they kind of hitched their wagon to Simone Biles.
Yeah. I
mean, if you take a look at all the ads from prior to the Olympics, she was heavily featured, and we all know what happened there. So I do think that hurt in that regard. But you bring up a very good point. And in order to foster interest, you're going to have to get back to a sense of that team. You mentioned teamwork or team building, just team play, just in general. This is Team USA going over there. Love it or hate it, you're representing the country, and it's suck it up, guys, and take a little pride. And if that's the case, then that's one thing that I think we can do. And then you and I've talked about it. I think that just the supply of sports ready to view is swamped my ability to comprehend, and actually, interestingly enough, has diminished my demand for it.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so important for the Olympics is that a lot of these sports, people really only watch it once every 4 years. Before I have watched, U.S. gymnastics in the Olympics, but I have never watched an Olympic or a non-Olympic gymnastics competition. Yeah. I've never watched a non-Olympic swimming event. Probably 3/4 of the Olympic sports, I've never watched it outside of the Olympics. And so they need to get some of those people more into, households, get their names more well-known, and get people actually looking forward to those sports. And again, most of the people are probably going to watch it one time every 4 years. So you gotta do it beforehand.
Well, you bring up a very good point. Here I am saying it's too much supply of just athletics in general on the TV, and I'll stand by that. And you're saying that maybe, given what the Olympic Games are, there's not as much observable supply or visible supply of the key players, particularly leading up into, because again, things will change over 4 years, but the year before the Olympics, the NBC can start building up a Ledecky or something along those lines, making sure that she is on, just wide world of sports, or occasionally gets on some interviews so people get familiar with her, as opposed to here's maybe one of the best female swimmers that we've ever had in the United States. And, a lot of people probably never even heard of her.
Yeah, exactly. And she's a name deserving of being heard and deserving of being known in this country. She's done phenomenal things and has all kinds of records. And it can't be too difficult to get her name more well known. I get swimming's not the most, important sport to everybody, but if you dominate a worldwide sport at the Olympics, you should be pretty well known. And she's decently well known, but I would argue that she's not as well known as she should be.
So in the end, Sam, there are a lot of reasons why interest in this Olympic Games is really at an nadir. And one that we haven't brought up is the fact that a lot of this is really, I'd say, NBC's, or it doesn't matter, NBC, it could be someone else. A lot of it's their own fault. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's because media, just in general, it's not just on NBC, it's all the major media outlets. They focus a lot of their product on what's known as clickbait. And clickbait is something that they know people are automatically going to hit, view, and they use that as eyeballs, that the unique views that they can sell to advertisers.
Absolutely.
And so they that's why we have all this divisive news out there now, is because people hit it and they get views, and that's what they sell to advertisers.
Exactly.
It makes money to put out crazy looking articles, divisive articles. CNN went overboard with how much they hated Donald Trump. Fox went the other way, knowing that their viewership is just going to keep on hitting on it, and that sells to advertisers. So things like Megan Rapinoe hitting a knee, that gets clickbait.
Yep. That gets comments.
That gets clickbait comments and all that stuff, negative or positive. That sells money for that. That just spells money.
Yeah.
For the media outlet. However, what they're doing there is turning off a huge number of people. Yep. Whereas from all intents and purposes, and by all accounts, the amazingly inoffensive Ledecky, you write a story about her, winning something. Guess how much clickbait there is. Nothing in comparison.
And I would almost consider the former to be inorganic growth for a company. It almost seems to be poor quality growth for a company. And, it seems like, again, that's where they're making their money is by going to these advertisers and saying, look how many clicks we get on this article. Yeah. And so it's kind of hard to work their way out of that cycle, but I think it is something that needs to be done. Focus on a more organic growth, focus on stories that, maybe don't get as much clickbait and as much comments, but continue to build up the backbone of your news organization, and something that people don't resent and people want to go and read good articles. And I think that is something that I think humans inherently desire. And I think, they may not get as much advertisement in the short term, but, I think that goes back to an inorganic versus organic growth for a company.
Well, focusing on clickbait prior to the Olympics has, I would say, ultimately led to less interest in the Olympics, and that hurts as well. Yep. So focus on the news, not on the clickbait. And I think maybe we could also see an increase in interest moving forward, because if you actually focused on the news as opposed to the divisiveness, the things that are going to stun, shock, and awe, then actually we might not be as diverse or fighting against ourselves as we currently are. And that's been a huge part of the reason. So boredom, boring events, no people in the stands, too many options, but none of them are what you want. 300 channels of nothing to watch, 1,000 different sports, and you don't care about any of them.
Wrong time of day. Being
able to find out the results of the competition before they view on the airwaves here in the United States, before they stream here. Then you have the lack of team building leading into the Olympics, and really the media outlets themselves doing everything they can to do everything but foster teamwork by focusing on clickbait leading into the Olympics, as opposed to more unifying news stories.
Absolutely.
Perfect storm, I think.
Perfect storm.
All right, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. Not sure if we've traded perspectives here today, but we have thrown out some ideas about why the Olympics is not as popular this year as it has been in years past. And hopefully maybe someone will listen and heed some advice and we can get back in, what is it, 2024?
Well, we have the winter coming up soon already.
There's going to be divisiveness about whether or not Beijing should even be holding the 2022 Olympics. But in any event, let's hope we can get past these divisive times and reunite there for the Olympics in the futures. Guys, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. You can always send us an email to tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. If you're interested in hearing more, reading more of what we have to say, you can check out our blog, Common Sense, at oakworth.com underneath the Thought Leadership tab. Sam, along with a lot of other good information.
Yep.
All right. One last chance.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.